Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Simon Jacobson is my name. I welcome everyone, including, as you see the camera here, is a web audience. And as a small introduction, the objective of this coming together, which is now taking place many years, I don't want to tell you how many years, make me feel old, but it's over 2 decades, close to 3. And I've always seen it like a journey, just like life is a journey. Each of us in our own unique roads, the ups and downs, the twists and turns, many of the unexpected challenges that we encounter along the way. So life is a journey, which is why the Torah is all about a story of a journey. And it's somewhat comforting to know that you're in a journey, because it means you're always on the move, and even if things aren't always looking so good, a journey implies that you can move to another location, another space. And obviously the journey is not just physical, that you go physically from one place to the next. It's also a spiritual journey, in the sense that emotionally and psychologically our soul is going through all kinds of changes through life. Now, of course, this journey of all of our lives begins in our childhood, when we're young. And actually the Kabbalists, the mystics, say that the journey begins even before your childhood, even before your birth. That the soul goes on a journey from heaven to earth. That souls, before they entered into your body, to my body, into this physical plane called the material universe, the souls exist in their own realm. Just as an example, something like electricity exists in its own realm before it enters into any particular appliance. So electricity we experience and we benefit from it when it's lighting up light bulbs, or energizing air conditioners or refrigerators or other appliances that we use on a daily basis. But electricity exists in its own plane, not visible to the naked eye. So the souls as well exist on a spiritual plane, and they go on a journey. And the soul is plucked away from its natural spiritual habitat and sent to earth. This is a description used very often in the mystics use it, the Kabbalists use it. Many commentaries in the Torah, when they talk, for instance, about Vayetze Yaakov, when Jacob leaves his home and he goes off to Haran, which means the wrath, a place of dark place, and he leaves Be'er Sheva, which is literally means the fountain of 7. So the Orach Chaim and other commentaries explain that Jacob's journey is actually the journey of every soul that leads a fountain of 7, a place of warmth and nurturing and moisture, place of water, and it enters into a dark, arid, and dry, cold land. So the journey that we're on is going on much longer than our memories will ever tell us, and it continues. Now, of course, it's always sad to hear when you think about our innocence as children, and the first time you lose your innocence. Is it the first time that your parents lied to you? Or is it the first time that you were disappointed? Or the first time that you realized that people can be cruel? It's hard to really trace back the time that each of us lost our so-called innocence and innocent approach to life. In a way, when the first time our purity was shattered, our expectations. Because it usually happens when you're very young. So the journey takes on some sad elements to it as well. So I always thought of this coming together, also as this every Wednesday night, also as a type of a journey that has led me and many people who have attended here to interact. In the beginning, when I began giving this class many years ago, the core group that would come were people from the arts and entertainment industry, and many of their backgrounds were very different from my own. But that made it only that more dramatic and more colorful and more meaningful, because the interaction when you interact with people that are like yourself, that grew up in your own ghetto, or your own street or your own community is usually not very, let's call it energizing. It's maybe more comfortable, but when does a person really blossom? Does a person really grow? Is when you're challenged, when you're in an environment that's not natural to you, when you leave your home, when you leave your habitat, your environment, the first time you go to summer camp, the first time you leave to school. So even though initially it may be uncomfortable, children cry every time the first time they go to school, but you begin to thrive, you come to your own, you discover yourself in environments that are not the comfortable ones, outside of your own comfort zone. Which is why God tells Abraham in the first commandment, which is really a commandment to each of us, Lech lecha ma'atzecha me'moladetecha mebeis avicha. Meaning, leave your homeland, the home of your parents, the place of your birth. And then you'll be able to discover yourself. Because if you were to ask yourself, who are you? Who am I? It's a very difficult question to answer. You can answer that I am perhaps a product of my parents, of my environment, of my education, of peer pressure. But who are you on your own? If you were not shaped, if you're not influenced, how could you even know who you are on your own, independent of the influences in your life? Many people think they're independent, but the truth is you're just living out a script. And as you get older, you realize you're just replaying what you turn out. We are, as they say, our mother's daughters and our father's sons, and we end up replaying the things we hated most. And we become the thing we didn't like at all. Or you sometimes become something you did like. But you wonder often, is this independent? Remember, the schools you went to, the things that shaped your attitudes, were determined long before you had any free will about it. You were not asked what school to go to. You were not asked what kind of home to grow up in, what kind of influences will be around you. So by the time you call yourself so-called independent, and you think you're a free spirit, you've been shaped by most things. Some cynics will actually say that none of us really make any free choices. That it's really an illusion. That we are actually products of our environments, products of our parents, products of our schooling, products of advertisers, being manipulated one way or another. And good manipulators make you feel that you are not being manipulated, that it's really your choice. Like what kind of clothing you wear, what you choose to put on this morning. Is it determined by your so-called independent choices, or is it based on the options provided to you in 2008 by the people who determine what styles are this year? I hear that in the eyeglasses designers make sure to change the eyeglass design every 2-3 years, because that's how you make sure you make money. Because if you could still wear the same eyeglasses 10 years, 20 years down the line, there'll be no, let's put it this way, economic incentives. So of course, we're fed to believe that people change, so you have to change your styles, you have to change your mood, you change your thing. Yeah, it's all nice and fine, but you have to sometimes wonder how much of it is manipulation, how much of it is real. But I'm not here to depict necessarily a negative picture. The fact is the Torah does believe that every person can make real choices, but real choices are not made in the areas that make you comfortable. Real choices are usually in the areas that don't make you comfortable. To play out the script based on the habits and patterns that you've grown up with is not any great achievement. It's the choices you make that are different and that are unexpected, and the spontaneous things that come your way where you make a choice that's not exactly fitting any pattern. That's, as Robert Frost said, the road less traveled is the true path of the free spirit. But then of course the question is, how many of us are truly free spirits? And how many of us are conformists? So I tried this question once, I'm never going to try it again. I asked a room like this, it was a little larger group, I said, how many of you are conformists? Now besides the fact that nobody raised their hand, everybody was quite insulted. I would even think that they were. So if there's nobody conformist in this room, or in that room, or in other thousands of rooms, so where are the conformists of our generation? That everyone accept us. Okay, that's fine. So I will say this, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I will say that obviously someone who's a conformist is not going to easily acknowledge they're a conformist. It's just like a narrow-minded person is not going to say I'm narrow-minded, nor is a subjective person going to say I'm subjective. Part of subjectivity makes you think that you're objective, and And in that sense, it's obviously a little blind spot that we all carry. We all like to feel that we have a certain independent spirit. But when you really look honestly and brutally at yourself, you have to wonder, look at your choices today and yesterday and tomorrow that you'll make. And really, let's list how many of those choices would you really say are nonconformist choices? How many choices do we make due to the pressures of the place we work, the pressures of our boss or our clients, or others that are demanding things from us, expectations? And how many choices do you truly make that are independent of any other pressure? So it's not necessary that we're conformists because we choose to be. Sometimes it's just we gravitate to a certain type of status quo simply because of reality on the ground, which is that we have to make ends meet, we have to live, pay our bills, and doing so doesn't come easily. So just some food for thought. I'm not here to go further than that. You can decide how you want to take that one way or the other. But as I said, as a means of introduction, this is what this so-called journey is about. That's how I like to see it. And I hope that you all feel the same. And at the end of this evening, feel that we have gone on a journey together. And hopefully you also come to a better place than we began. That wouldn't be so cool if I took you on a journey that would be worse than where you began. Even though there are some people who told me that I tend to make happy people miserable and miserable people happy, but it's not something I'm necessarily proud of. I remember a fellow came to this class years ago, and he used to come every week, every Wednesday night. And then once I remember after a few weeks he didn't show up. He called me up and let me know. He says, "I want you to know, Rabbi, the reason I'm not coming is not because of anything you've said or offended or anything offensive or not interesting. It's actually it's actually in the contrary. It's changing my life, and that's why I stopped coming, because I'm too young to hear about this. I have too much fun. I still have to. The way he put it was, I have too many frivolous activities I still have to keep doing, because since I've been coming to your class, I come home at night. I feel serious about things, and I start thinking about the bigger picture and what life is really about and the meaning of life and so on. And frankly, as he put it, you're making my life miserable. I'm not able to have that type of casual, shallow fun. So a few weeks later, he said, "So I'll see you in a few years from now, when I lose some of my hormones, and I weaken my drive and stuff like that." And actually, a few weeks later, he appeared. So I used the opportunity to say, without using his name, he's not here tonight. I said, "Well, here's a fellow here that's the greatest compliment I got was that I make his life miserable." So I don't want to put it that way, but it's a somewhat an interesting compliment that if you can make somebody feel to think deeper about their lives and be a little more introspective and perhaps think of why we're here on this earth in the first place. So yes, it may make some people uncomfortable. I guess such a discomfort is not such a bad thing for once in a while. Would you agree? Okay, good. Fine. So with that being said, I didn't hear anybody agree, but it's fine with me. I felt that way. Joel, would you agree? The web audience. Well, you have to agree because I'm the one that's speaking, and you got no choice but to listen to what I have to say. You do have a choice. You could always one click away from the Disney Channel. So, with that being said, as a small introduction, so tonight's topic in this ongoing journey, as I said, is somewhat of a sad topic, but also a happy topic, as most of life is. We call bittersweet or mixture, paradoxical. That's the word, paradoxical. So we titled this class called "The Sad Smile." I remember many years ago, when I was a kid. So there's a thing called the silent movies. Now, I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember a silent movie, and there was only silent movies. But there was a time there were only silent movies where sound wasn't yet developed, at least not in the cinema, in the world of cinema. So there was the silent movies, which you still see once in a while, and they're quite exotic in many ways. But I remember I was always very intrigued by silent movies, and in a way, people have to rely purely on body language, and you can't rely on voice. and there were many actors who developed very powerful body language to communicate and convey a certain feeling. I remember there was a silent film called He Who Gets Slapped that later was adapted. I saw it in a book, and it was about a clown. It was about a clown who called himself He, and his act was in the circus, this clown, that they had a little skit in the circus, and during the skit, at some point, the other clowns began to slap this clown, who was called He, H-E. He. So he became known as He Who Gets Slapped, capital H, the clown that got slapped. And the place would become, would break out in an uproar of laughter every time he would get slapped. You know, this type of I guess, slapstick comedy. And people just enjoyed, I guess, seeing someone get slapped. And this was the act. And in the silent film, you know, there's no sound. So you just see these big chubby guys, or people munching on popcorn or on lollipops or whatever it is, laughing at this clown. So you just see the laughter, you don't really hear it. But it was an interesting scene. Now, what's the story behind the story? As we all know, clowns, even though they make people laugh, and clowns have this element of entertainment for children and so on, but a clown was also somewhat of a tragic figure. And of course, this He Who Gets Slapped, this clown had a tragic story behind him. And what is the story? The story was that he was actually a professor. And he was a professor who was brilliant and acknowledged as such. And he was working on his major lifetime thesis, developing some theory. I don't even remember that the theory is relevant, what the theory was, but some major breakthrough. And he had a beautiful wife. And he had a patron of the arts, who supported him while he was developing and researching his theory. Now he got so immersed in this project of his, that of course his wife wandered off with this patron. In addition to the fact that he got extremely sick, because he'd been so working, especially the last few months when he had to make the big presentation for what they call the Academy of the Wise, the wizards, that he became extremely sick and he was on his deathbed. But the night came, he had finished his paper, and it was to be read in front of the entire world, represented by this Academy of the Wise. This is the story. And he was so sick he couldn't read it, which was, of course, he knew it was happening. So being that he trusted this patron so much, the person who had supported him, this wealthy man who absolutely had no clue what this theory was or what was it about, but he just supported it, maybe because of his wife or whatever. So he says and asks him, he says, maybe you can read it for me tonight at the Academy. So the man says, absolutely, my pleasure, my honor. And he does so. The Academy is everybody in anticipation. So this wealthy patron, who everybody knew, but no one has assumed it's possible to write such a document, gets up and starts reading it. And as he reads it, the whole crowd is in awe of the brilliance, of the breakthrough, of the innovation. Meanwhile, the old man, the professor, was sick in bed, and he just couldn't control himself. So he got himself dressed up, even though he was sick like anything, put on a coat, he looked like a homeless guy, and he decided he wanted to see the reaction, because this is his lifetime work. So you can imagine he wanted to see how people are reacting to his brilliant paper, document. So finally he schleps himself to the place, to the Academy. He gets in, and he sees the man standing up there, the wealthy guy standing up there, reading it. And he sees how everybody is so inspired and in awe of it. So he's really taking it in, even though he was sick. And finally, the guy's about to come to the conclusion of the paper, the document. So this man, the professor, who was actually the author of it, schleps himself up slowly. He's able to barely make it up to the stage. Now this patron became so enamored with himself and the way the people were responding, he didn't say at that point that he was reading someone else's document. So he decided, might as well take in the whole kavod, the whole honor, as if it was his own. And as he finished, the applause, the standing ovation was so powerful and so resonating This guy could not control himself, so he simply did not state that he was reading someone else's paper. Meanwhile, the professor comes up and starts crying and saying, this is my paper. And everyone's watching and waiting to see what is he going to do. Who's this guy? Old, sick man, looked like a ragged clothing. So the wealthy patron who had supported him and had earned his trust suddenly turns around and gives him a slap across the face. You're like, who are you? And instead of not only not giving him the credit for the paper that he wrote, dismissed him, and the whole place started laughing. They thought a homeless man wandered off the street, and this wealthy patron dismissed him, so everyone realized, it's a guy, and they said, carry him out, The whole place burst out in laughter. So here's the professor, barely alive, lost all his wife to this patron, to this baron, lost his credit, lost everything. So he went on, he put himself into a self-imposed exile, and became a clown, a crying clown, who would travel from circus to circus, from city to city, and he played the act. He called himself he who gets slapped. And he played the act, he replayed what happened, how people laugh and can dismiss someone, even though he's the person that is the one that was the author of this, the brilliant professor, dismiss him because some pompous baron stood there and was able to arrogantly take credit for something he never even dreamt of. Now there's an end to the story as well. As I said, it's a silent film, and it's been published. He Who Gets Slapped. Check it out. It always remained with me. I was a child when I first saw it. It always remained with me because as you grow older, you start realizing, yes, many people get slapped. And it's not always the people who earn the right are the ones that get the covet, as they say, the honor. It's often the people who push themselves to the top that get the honor. As a matter of fact, the greatest people of all history are unsung heroes that we don't even know their names. The expression in the Chazal, sages say, Kol habareich min hakovet, everyone who runs from honor, the honor will pursue you. And Kol habareich achrei hakovet, everyone who runs after honor, the honor will elude you. Because true honor, the sages are saying, is not something you can pursue, not something you can buy, not something you can just purchase. You have to earn it, and you earn it through humility. However, we live in a false world. As the Kabbalists and the Hasidic masses like to say, it's called Alma de Shikra, which means a lying, a deceptive world. It's a world where you can say one thing and mean something else. You can smile to somebody and then stab them in the back, and vice versa. It's a deceptive world we call a world of duplicity, which for many of the mystics and the Kabbalists, they wonder, how is it possible? How is it possible in a universe created by God, where God is seamless, Hashem Echad, we say, one unity that permeates all of existence? How is it possible for duplicity? If, for example, what we call Elam HaEmes, in the world of truth, what you see is what you get. There is no such thing as two worlds. For children, little children, also what you see is what you get. Children don't think in terms of duplicity, that someone that loves you can say I love you and then a moment later hurt you. It's an inconceivable concept for a child. The first time we actually experience that type of duplicity it must be a very traumatic and devastating experience. But then once we enter the world of duplicity, we too become duplicitous. Now again, just as I said before, if I asked how many people are conformists here, I'm sure no one would raise their hand. If I asked how many of you duplicitous, probably most people also wouldn't raise their hand. But the fact is we are, whether you like it or not. Now, of course, there are what we call clinical liars and malicious, deceptive people, con artists, and then there are people who are not necessarily intentionally. It's just part of the nature of this world. Now, for example, and even in Torah law, there's even a condoning of it. Let's say in business negotiations, you never show your cards if you're a good negotiator. That, in a way, is deception, whether you like it or not. This universe, the one we live in, is such that creates a world where things are concealed and there are things that are hidden, to the point we don't even see a problem with it. But when the mystics talk about it, they see a fundamental problem with it, because as I said, if there's only one God, there's only one reality. two realities is what we call idolatry. We call shituf, vedazara, you call it, it's not seamlessness, it's not unity. So the fact that a person can lie and get away with it, or even if you don't get away with it, demonstrates that this world does have two dimensions, at least two dimensions. So yes, in the spiritual realm, olam ha'emes, in a world of truth, as one chassid once said, they asked him, what do you look forward to? He was on his last day of his life. He says, I look forward to one day in my life I no longer will lie. Because lying doesn't mean that you're lying necessarily intentionally. Deception is just the mere fact that existence, the one we see, is disconnected from its source. That if there's an architect, a cosmic architect that put this existence in place, and we can so easily deny it, that itself is already a deception. So, as the Arizal writes, or says, in his doctrine called the Tzimtzum, which is one of the classical contributions of the Holy Arizal, of Isaac Luria, the 16th century mystic from Tzfat. So he explains in a very profound, called the Seidat Tzimtzum, the secret of the Tzimtzum, that for this universe to exist as we see it right now, for us to be able to sit here as independent entities, even though we are constantly being energized by a source, can only be possible because the source is concealed from us. And he calls that concealment a form of tzimtzum. It's a concealment. So existence by nature is called a concealed state of being. So even though the lights may be turned on, and we may think we're living not in the dark ages, but in the age of knowledge, that doesn't mean we aren't blind. It just means we can see certain things, but for instance, we cannot see that which makes us tick. We do not see subatomic particles, and you don't see DNA, and you don't see a soul, and you can't see love, and anything that truly matters, that makes life be, is something that we do not see. You have to some way either experience it, sense it, or faith. So that itself, how is that possible? How is it possible, as he puts it, or others put it, that if we all human beings are part of one large organism, as the Yerushalmi says, in the concept of Avos Yisrael, that all the people are all part of one large organism, which means, just as it's inconceivable for the right arm to hit a left arm, how is it conceivable for us to hurt each other? And I don't think I need to prove that people hurt each other. That happens all the time. And among Jews as well. Divisiveness, even hate. And it's not a good time to talk about this, but the 3 weeks is a time where the temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred, sinas chinam. How is it possible? Philosophically. I know none of us wonder how it's possible. You see it happening all the time. But philosophically, if we're all one, is it conceivable for one hand to hit another hand of the same body? To hurt yourself, basically? So the answer is because it's concealed. You don't feel it. You don't feel that if another person is hurting, it's your pain. You just don't feel it. The Arizal says one of the reasons before the prayer service in the morning, Shachris, so there's a custom to say, Hareini Mekabel, I accept upon myself the mitzvah. The connection called V'ahavta l'recha kamecha. Mitzvah, the true translation of mitzvah is not commandment, it's connection. It comes from the word safsa and chibur, to connect, which of course opens up a whole other discussion. No one wants to be commanded, but everybody wants to be connected. So he says that you open up the prayer by introducing, you say, I accept upon myself the mitzvah of loving my fellow like myself, which is the cardinal mitzvah of the entire Torah. So the question he asks, this is the Arizal, in the Likutei Torah, the Taimei HaMitzvahs, on the Parasha Kedoshim where the mitzvah is said, is why? Why, when you're going to pray, you're going to speak to God? What does it have to do with loving other people? There's a time for what we call mitzvahs between one person and another, and there's now you're going to pray, it's between you and God. The prayer was in place of the offering, the carbon, the offering and sacrifices brought in the temple. It's between you and God, ben adam lamakim. So why is it important to, before you go, bring an offering and pray and open your heart to God, that you accept, that you love everyone like yourself? And his answer is a fascinating answer. It says, because when a Kohen, a priest, would bring an offering in the temple, the Kohen had to be couldn't be a balmum, could not be someone that had any handicap, because when you bring an offering to God, you have to come complete. Just as the offering has to be complete, you have to be complete. Since prayer is like an offering, and therefore everyone doing the prayer is like a Kohen presenting the offering, if you do not accept that the entire nation is part of you and one with you, you're essentially entering into the offering a balmum, because you don't have all the other organs of your body. Since the entire people are one organism, if one of them is missing, you are unable to bring this offering. That's how he explains why we begin the prayer, which has so many fascinating implications. Above all, which is somewhat of a tangent but not completely, what is it? It is the implication that when you serve God and other people are compromised in the process, you are not serving truly God. In other words, selfishly saying, I am now in the middle of prayer and I cannot help another person, is not considered serving God. That's called selfish religion. And selfish religion is about you, not about God. Because as some of the masters say, that if you truly love God, then you love what your lover loves. And since God says, Ahafti eschem amar Hashem, if you truly love God, you have to love what God loves. And what does God love? His people. So how is it possible for you to love God and not love the people? It means it's about you, it's not about God. Which is why there are so many mitzvahs that focus that if a person, that even it says it even about no one less than Jesus himself. His teacher, it says, the Talmud says, and it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch, that you should not be like a certain teacher who was the teacher of Yoshka, of Jesus, who pushed him away with two hands. The story goes that he was in the middle of prayer, and Jesus came to see him, and it was like his last chance. He wanted to speak to his teacher, and his teacher, in the middle of prayer, motioned him to step aside, to wait, and Jesus took it to mean that he's rejecting him, and he never returned again, which means he went off on his own journey. So the laws of Talmud Torah, when you're a teacher, don't be like this teacher who pushed his student away with two hands, even though there are plenty of reasons that he could have pushed him away, but he pushed him away because he was in the middle of prayer, which means basically suggesting that the student comes first. And there are many incidents like this. You have another law, for instance. Kohen Gadol, the high priest, goes in once a year into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, which is a very rare occasion, once a year just for a little while. And no one else is allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. It's only on that one day, and to pray for the healing, for the kapara, forgiveness of the entire nation. So you'd think this is an extraordinary experience, and the Talmud says an interesting incident, an interesting law, that if the high priest hears a rumble, a sound outside while he's in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, he has to leave the Holy of Holies and go outside to see maybe someone was hurt. Now the scenario itself is quite bizarre. He's in the middle of the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. Why? Because pikuach nefesh, saving a life, is more important than everything. More important than the entire Torah, except three mitzvahs, three laws that saving a life is not: murder, idolatry, incest. But in this case, the Kohen Gadol is supposed to go. Maybe there's a life. It's only maybe. It's a suffix. It's a doubt. Now you remember, in the high priest on Yom Kippur in the temple, there were not one man standing there. There were thousands of priests around and Levites, and there were tens of thousands of Jews in general around the area. So, nevertheless, the Torah feels compelled to say that he has to leave. Why can't he rely someone else will do it? Because that's not the way. You hear something that may be dangerous, even if you're not sure, it's more important than you're standing in the Holy of Holies to pray to God for the forgiveness of the people. Just to show you how the extent of how the Torah rejects and abhors, actually, religious selfishness, which means people who in the name of religion feel that what they are doing are more important than anything else. Sometimes it's about you, it's not about God. You dress it up like it's God. I can go on and on, but it's not really the theme of this discussion, even though it's connected to the 3 weeks. So going back to he who gets slapped, what struck me so much is that as you get older, you start really realizing, yes, we live in not only in a duplicitous world, we live in a world where, yeah, the wicked prosper often and the righteous suffer, where people who should deserve credit don't get the credit, and you can have a baron standing up, and not only does he take credit for things that others have done, because he has the money, but he also dismisses and slaps a person like that. Now he imposed a self-imposed exile, this he who gets slapped, this clown, traveled around. There's an end to the story, as I said, where he gets even with the baron, but it's not so relevant to our discussion here. What struck me was whenever you think about a clown, you find this combination of tragedy and comedy. They say there's a very thin line between tragedy and comedy. I mean, the cynics put it this way, that tragedy is when it happens to you, and comedy is when it happens to someone else. I don't want to say that, because I don't believe in that approach. But there's a thin line between tragedy and comedy. Sometimes the line is just about how many years pass. If it's a tragedy, if it's last year, if it happened 1,000 years ago, it could be sometimes seen as humorous. I don't mean humorous in that sense. Just like there's a thin line between faith and heresy, and a thin line between many paradoxes, many extremes. Jews in many ways have mastered humor, sense of humor, and some say it came because they suffered a lot. And humor was their saving grace, was the way to relieve themselves and the way to get through a lot of things, that you had to some way take it lightheartedly in a sense. I'm not, God forbid, trying to suggest a Holocaust or pogroms as being lighthearted when innocent people were killed, but I'm talking about the overall experience of evil and the overall experience of suffering created a certain type of, I guess, immunity, is a certain sense of humor in the process. So there is a certain element of sadness even in humor, and humor and sadness. I'm not talking about frivolous or superficial humor. So you see people sometimes, I've seen those that have suffered greatly, unfortunately, and they're able to muster up and they're able to find a smile on their face. And not necessarily due to being fake or anything. They have a happiness, but if you know their lives and you know what's behind the smile, often there's a lot of sadness in that person's life. And then there's the other way around as well. There are some people who have developed, for some reason or other, a sour face, or are angry, or bitter. And does that necessarily define a complete person? Not necessarily. So I wanted to address this theme from many different angles, because in a way it looks upon ourselves. If you ask yourself, do you see yourself as a happy person or a sad person? So there are people who will say, I'm mostly sad, despondent, depressed, and they can give you a good list of reasons why things didn't work out in your life. You always seem to be on the other end of success. You feel others have passed you by. There are reasons we sometimes our own self, our own worst enemy. And this, of course, goes back to our own childhoods. What kind of childhood did you have? Did you have a happy childhood? Do you remember being happy in your home? Or was it or were you not happy? And it's not always easy to remember, but you usually remember how you felt. There are homes where there was a lot of joy, laughter, and lightness. But there are homes where there was a lot of darkness. Where there's abuse in a home, it always brings darkness. Especially a home where there are a lot of secrets, where a father and mother don't really communicate with each other. Children don't need to be told these things. They pick it up. And especially if there's abuse at home, or any form of shame, where you have maybe an alcoholic parent, or you have other forces at work, called dysfunctionality. So some say that we live in a dysfunctional age, and every family is dysfunctional. Yeah, maybe it's true to some extent, but some are definitely more dysfunctional than others. So what happens to children when they grow up in a home like that, where there's a lot of secrets, and where there's no trust, and where there's no seamlessness, where there's duplicity going on? Again, children don't have to be told this. There's a certain vibe, and the vibe is one of darkness. And it has to affect people to the point, the children that is, in their impressionable years, they develop an element of sadness. You develop an element of despondency. On the other hand, when your parents are happy with each other, and with the home is one of life, filled with life, and there are guests, and there's engaged dialogue, and even arguments, but arguments that are about opening up. People are open instead of constantly putting energy into concealing things and hiding things. That creates an openness that a child learns that I could also be open. And since I can be open, it usually will bring out a lot more ability of laughter, humor, a sense of I guess, breathing, that you can breathe. I hear from many children, or they're not children any longer, chronologically, that grew up in very dark homes. One of the common expressions you hear when you grow up in a home where there's darkness, children will say, I felt suffocated, asphyxiated. I would cry a lot. I felt alone a lot. Now, it's one of the saddest things to hear, a child that felt alone. Where were your parents? Why weren't they there? So they were so consumed with their own things, they were never around. And when they ever felt a little guilty, they compensate with throwing a gift, taking on a trip. Everything what the child needs is simply attention and not to feel so alone, to feel like someone cares. But when parents themselves are children and busy in their own playgrounds, they don't have time for their own children. You hear many parents today will say, I'm too busy working to give my full attention to my children. Why are you working? In order to give my children security. It always makes me, it makes you cry, but it makes you laugh as well. What does that mean? You're busy hurting your children in order to help them, like when? So they later should have a lot of money when you die. Meanwhile, all that comfort and the nurturing and the confidence that a child needs is worth more than all the money, and that you're depriving them because you're giving them money to pay their bills, which usually doesn't help them anyway, because children will get into a fight about their inheritance, as usually is the case, and so on and so forth. So, when you hear all of this, if you stand as an outsider, and it's not you, it can be humorous to the extent. I'm sure angels in heaven laugh, as they did laugh when they told God, look at this human race you created. You created them, send them down to earth, and look what they do with their gifts. So God said, you're so smart, I'll send you down, let's see what you do. And they became much worse than the human beings. They're called the Nephilim. At the end of the book of Genesis, you hear about the fallen angels. The angels that laughed at the people and said they were cynical and humorous. They found it humorous. So they were put into that same position. It doesn't become so humorous. It becomes quite tragic. But this is what we call the human comedy or the human tragedy. As I said, it's a very thin line. If you're not involved, it can be funny. There's an expression in Yiddish that if you wouldn't cry, it would make you laugh. There are many things like that. They're so bizarre. They're they're insanity. The problem is when it happens to us, it's quite tragic. To see that type of climate of dysfunctionality creates a very big mixture between this, what we call sadness and happiness. So to answer the question, are you a sad person, are you a happy person, is not such an easy question to answer. There are people who consider themselves very sad. There's some people who consider themselves happy. Doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. I would say that it gets more complicated because the fact is we have both. Hopefully we have both. Because there's no life that doesn't have some joy in it, and there's no life that doesn't have some sadness. Life is not one-dimensional. It's not vanilla. It's not gray. It's not one color. I was going to say gray, but it's really multi-color. There is no person on this earth that is not going to suffer a loss in this world. Hopefully the loss will come the way it should come. The generations before us pass away before the generations after us. But tragically, sometimes it works not that way as well. But there is no person that's immune from experiencing a loss in this world. And there's no one that's not going to fail at something. And there's no one that's not going to have some disappointments and broken dreams. So that's an impossibility. To avoid suffering, to avoid sorrow, is just simply not realistic in this world at which we live. Why is another story, but that's how it is. On the other hand, there is no life that if you don't look at it closely, you'll find there's no life that doesn't have any joy. It's true that tragedy tends to overwhelm joy, which means you may have great blessings in your life, but when things aren't working, you forget those blessings because you get consumed with your moment, the moment, the instant of what you feel like right now. But if you look at the full picture of things, there is a balance. One could argue that if you made a list of the things that may give you happiness, the things that give you sadness, that the sad list is bigger than the happy list, and it's probably true. There are probably more sad things that happen in this life, in our lifetimes, than happy things. Yet I'll share with you a story that happened with a woman in Toronto. I heard it from the rabbi from Chicago, who knew the family. So he knew the daughter of this woman in Chicago. This woman in Chicago was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and the doctors gave her a certain amount of time, and that was that. So she ended up in the hospital in Toronto, waiting out her time. And her daughter, who lived in Chicago, would come visit her. So from time to time, her daughter would bring along something to read to her. Her mother was an intelligent woman. She was actually an educator in her professional life. So her daughter would bring, once she brought, that's how I know the stories, because she brought along a copy of my book called Toward a Meaningful Life. And the daughter was reading it to her. She asked her mother, what chapters would you like me to read, Mom? So her mother said, what chapters? Tell me some options. So reading through the chapters, which really cover, I guess, the spectrum of life. So she chose the two chapters, one, pain and suffering, obviously, appropriate to her situation, and the second one, education. And her daughter was reading, and the way I was told the story, what the daughter told to the rabbi that told it to me, that in the chapter pain and suffering, the question is posed there, that, well, the equation, so to speak, that if you were to actually make a list of the items in your life, experiences in your life, especially, let's put it once you reach middle life or a little later, you usually will come up with more sad events than positive events. So you can make the calculation, it's a business calculation, that it's simply not worth it. If it was at least an equal list, so they cancel each other out, the good things and the bad things. But if the bad things are more quantity than the negative, life is not fair. You're not even coming out even. As I said, that's a good business calculation. Now it's actually Shammai that actually said that in the Talmud. Of all things, the Talmud has this argument, whether it's more pleasant to be born or not to be born. I like that question. It's a very life-affirming question, right? So there's a disagreement. Shammai and Hillel, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. There's a classical two opinions, where Shammai in this case says it's more pleasant not to be born than to be born. Nuach la'adam shalei nivra mishanivra. And Hillel says Nuach la'adam shanivra mishalei. It's more pleasant to be born than not to be born. To be created than not to be created. And even though in most cases the law, the ruling goes according to Hillel, in this case the ruling goes according to Shammai. As the Alter Rebbe, Rab Shneir Zalman, the Baal HaTanya writes, if that's the case, so why are we born? If Shammai is correct, no one should be born if it's not so pleasant. So he answers with the word nuach in Hebrew means to be more. It may be more pleasant to your soul remains in heaven where there's no illness, and there's no corruption, and there's no greed, and there's none all the maladies and cruelty of this world. Pleasant, it's more in heaven, but purposeful. The purpose of existence is down here. Like the Mishnah says, Yofa Shah Achas, 1 hour of hard work, Tshuva Maisim Tevim, return and good deeds in this world is worth more than all the life of Chayal Maba. 1 hour is worth more than all the life of the world to come. And then continues, and Yofa Shah Achas, and 1 hour of pleasure, Keres Ruach, similar to Nuach. Pleasure in the world to come is worth more than all the pleasures of this world. So pleasure, we don't come to this earth for pleasure. We come to this earth for purpose. Not to say you can't have pleasure in this world. And obviously the pleasure of finding your purpose is much deeper than all the pleasures that you'll ever have and delights in any universe. But it's hard work. It comes with hard work. So no one argues that this world is an easy one. It says, Kol hadrachim b'cheska sakana. All the paths are filled with danger. We all know tomorrow, no one knows what tomorrow will bring. God should bless us all. We should only have good things in our lives. But that doesn't mean we know for sure. And we pray, we ask, we hope. So going back to the story with the woman in Toronto, so then the book continues, the chapter continues. So if that's the case, why is life worth it? And the answer they're given there which is taken from a very profound concept in the Talmud and the Zohar, is that when you look at life quantitatively, yes, if it was a business transaction and you have more losses than gains, you go out of business. So quantitatively, maybe the losses in our lives may be quantity-wise more than the gains. But qualitatively, you're sent onto this life for a purpose. And even the losses in your life also have a purpose, because they're also part of your journey. They're also part of your experiences. It's how you use it is the challenge, and that's where we have free will. And therefore, that's why life is worth it. Qualitatively, this life has the deepest purpose. Here's where you can find your indispensable contribution to existence. In heaven, you cannot find that. It's too comfortable. You're in your comfort zone. You can only find it when you're challenged. As I said earlier, you live in your parents' home, surrounded by an environment that has shaped you. You don't know who you are. Maybe you're just a product of your environment. Lech lecha ma'artzecha, the great statement made, that the first mitzvah to Abraham was you have to leave your environment. And three ways it's expressed: your homeland, artzecha, maladetecha, beis avicha, your land, your home of your parents, and your place of birth. So it's just in case you don't get the message. There's three different ways it's expressed. And I discussed here many times what those three signify. But the bottom line is that in heaven it's more pleasant, but on earth is more purpose. And this is where you discover who you truly are and what you're capable of. So in that context, even the pains of life are also part of that purpose. Then the daughter read to her a section from the chapter on education, where it says that education is not just teaching a child facts and information, it's shaping a life. So an educator has to know that when you educate someone, you've shaped a life forever. You maybe changed the universe forever and for generations to come. What happened next was the following, exactly as it was told to me. This woman was so uplifted by these two ideas. She had already signed a DNR to take her off the life support or whatever she was on, or the medications that was keeping her, because she had the pain and her life was waning. As I said, terminal illness. But when she heard this about pain, and she heard this about education, for some reason it infused her with such a will to live. She called the doctors back in and said she wants to renege on her DNR, and she wants to live. This happened 9 years ago. This woman I've met since, she's alive. She not only got out of the hospital, her terminal illness went away. The doctors attribute it, some say it's a miracle, some say it was simply her willpower, and some say it's yes, when you have that strong optimism, it is a great fighter and strengthener of immune systems. The fact is, God forbid, patients lying in hospitals with no visitors and no guests and no hope, it definitely contributes to weakening their situation. You have people come and visit you. It gives you hope. It gives you strength. It has to strengthen your immune system. Who was it that wrote that story? Was it O. Henry? The one with the sick, the invalid, the dying terminal ill person, and he saw the tree out there with the leaves, and as he saw the leaves fall, he said to himself that the day the last leaf will fall from the tree, that's the day when he will also die. Did anyone ever heard of that one? I think it's O. Henry.
And I think somebody makes a leaf.
Exactly, an artist comes, and while he's asleep, they draw a leaf. They draw a leaf outside on the window. So and every day when he wakes up, this guy, he keeps looking, and the leaf is still there. You know, even though the truth is no leaves were there, but that leaf kind of gave him the strength, because he connected his destiny with the leaf. So if the leaf falls, I will fall. You know, I mean, it's whether it's exactly the story that happened or not, but the concept is absolutely true. I have seen it. You know, the power of adrenaline, the power of willpower, of hope, others giving you strength, is absolutely has physiological effects, psychosomatic or actual physiological impact on us. There's no question about it. You know, if you saw that film called What the Bleep, do we know that, as they say, how the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. Our attitudes do affect things. I don't know if it's quite as fantastic as The Secret would like us to believe, that if you imagine a Jaguar in your driveway, you're going to get one. But there's no question, as the Hasidic Rebbe say, Tzach gut wird sein gut. If you think good, it will be good, and it's not just a euphemism or a nice line, a bumper sticker. It means actually that we can shape destiny. Does it mean we always shape it? Does it mean that it's always going to work exactly? Maybe not. God may have other plans. But you can definitely be your own worst enemy, that's for sure. And attitudes absolutely have a difference. But a person's attitudes, they have no hope in themselves, no belief in themselves. Very hard to help someone that does not believe in themselves. The key thing is to help people help themselves, give them that strength. So when we talk about sadness and joy, and the reason, of course, I'm discussing it is because we just entered now into what's called the dire straits. Bein Hamtzarim is an expression from the book of Eicha, Lamentations, which we sadly read on Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the Jewish calendar. So it's a 3-week period that began Sunday and lasts for 3 weeks Sunday, till 3 weeks from this last Sunday, which will conclude with Tisha B'Av. Our hope is, as I will soon discuss, that Tisha B'Av can be turned into the greatest holiday. But if it does not, these are considered the 3 saddest weeks. Historically, the reason for it is because, as the Mishnah says, 5 tragic events happened at the beginning of the 3-week period, and 5 tragic events happened at the end. 5 tragic events in the beginning with the breaking of the tablets. Moses broke the tablets after the Jews built the golden calf. And the last one of the 5 is that, or one of the major ones of the 5, is that they scaled the Babylonians, and then 490 years later, the Romans, some say it happened exactly the same day, scaled the walls around Jerusalem, and 3 weeks later, again on the same night, the same day, they destroyed the temple, which is Tisha B'Av. So this 3-week period marks the saddest time of the calendar, and many sad events happened besides those five. Now, I once wrote, if anybody want to understand the 5 events that happened, what it means in psychological terms, I wrote a few articles about it. So if you email us, my office, I'd be happy to send it to you if you want to read it. And that's at meaningfullife.com. That's the website. That's the station break. Station identification, they call it. Now, this is the so-called the technical things that happen. But as they say, Megalgalin schus l'yom zakai, and they say the opposite as well, Megalgalin chayv, which means good things happen in good times, and bad things happen in bad times. Why is it that these 3 weeks, and this time of year, these sad events happened? Is because this is a sad time of energy in the year. In Judaism, it's not that events that dictate the time, it's time that dictates the events. What that means is, as the Arizal says, Hayom ma'ilin niskarim v'nasim. When we celebrate a holiday, let's say Passover when the Jews left Egypt, it's not just commemorating an event that happened 3,320 years ago. It's actually, time is like a spiral. What is a spiral? Not linear. Time is not like a river of time that travels from past through present to future. Time is a spiral, like a cycle. And it's a form of energy that repeats its pattern and returns to the orbit, the point of orbit. But like a spiral, it's on a different axis. So it's the same orbit, different axis. So every year on Rosh Hashanah, what happened the first Rosh Hashanah, Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masecha, is recreated. That's why your birthday is not some another day. It's not just a day you remember that you were born many years ago. That day, your soul's energy, Mazali Gever, has power. And therefore holidays, special days, are actually a recreation. It's like time returns to its original point, which was what makes holidays so much more powerful. They're not just commemorations of past events. It's you reliving it, actually. You can tap into that energy. For example, the question is asked, why are there 7 days in a week? Why don't we just continue counting one long number? 1 through 7 through 14, 21, 28, 35, etc., etc. You don't know how far it can go? We'll see. 42, 4,200, 42,000. Why? Who decided to make a break at the 7? So So I don't know if you know this, but when they developed the metric system in Europe, so metric system, of course, is, as Europeans like to remind Americans that everything is uneven here, but there everything is balanced, tens, millimeters, and metrics, liters, and so on. And here it's all different strange numbers. So they also suggested in that whole concept of metric system to make a week of 10 days. That would really make balance. You have everything. Why 7? However, that never caught on. The obvious reason is because no one is waiting 10 days for a weekend. It's just too much. There'd be too much. The suicide rate would go up, I assume, and then there'd be too much depression. Even now they're working on a 4-day work week or cutting it down. 7 days seem to be psychologically the breaking, the boiling point, as much as people can tolerate. 5 days, weekend, fine. But that's like a technical reason. What is the reason? Why 7 days? So Hasidic philosophy explains, a very fascinating explanation, because the cycle of time, as I just explained, is a spiral. And the cycle of time works by 7s. There are 7 emotions: Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. Those of you familiar with the Omer book that I've done, between Passover and Shavuos, 7 times 7, 49 days. 7 days in the week, 7 years of the sabbatical. So 7 is not just some random number. Every day is an energy. When we say Hayom Yom Echad, we say every day the song of the day, Shir Shal Yom. We're repeating, we're explaining the energy of that day. Every Sunday repeats what happened the first Sunday. That's why in the Bible, in Genesis, it's so significant that the Torah spells out what happened each day. Why do we care? It's thousands of years later. Why would we care what happened those first 6 days, 7 days? Because they're happening now. Every Sunday is the energy of chesed, of love, of light. That's why light was created that day. Monday is the energy of gvura, of division. That's why the heaven and earth, the higher waters and the lower waters are separated. Tiferes, compassion, is day 3. Day 6 is the creation of the human being. So we actually recreate. So when it comes to day 7, it's not just a number. Actually, time returns to its original cycle. So you begin from 1 again. This is the mystical, spiritual explanation, which of course gives a whole different meaning to time. So with that, in that context, the time we are in now, these 3 weeks, is a negative energy. Now, not to be taken wrong, that doesn't mean that there's any predestined negativity that has to happen. It just means, like anything in life, there are cycles. What is the antithesis of a month of the 3 weeks, of the month of Av specifically? The antithesis is the month of Adar. Adar is a month of joy, Mazole Bari, the mazel of joy, of simcha, dogim. On the month of Av, or the 3 weeks in general, is a time of sadness. It means that life is a cycle. And as I said, this does not mean that anything is predestined, that negative things have to happen. It means that it's a time where you have to be more sober, more careful. It's like a predisposition, just like a mood. Just because something negative happens in your life doesn't mean you have to become a negative person. It's a predisposition to it. So you have to learn to balance it out. Just like when a storm strikes, if you're a good swimmer in the ocean, you don't fight the storm, you just swim with the waves. And there are times where you have the additional beauty and joy of Adar. But the Talmud equates the two. The Talmud says, Kishem, just as when the month of Av begins, we increase in sadness, so too when the month of Adar begins, we increase in joy. Actually, it's the opposite way. Just as we increase in joy in Adar, we increase in sadness. So the Munketcher writes, Minchas Elazar says, Mishanichnas Av, as Av enters Mamayitin B'Simcha, which means you decrease in joy, he translates it to be Mamayitin, you weaken the negative forces of Av through joy. That's what he says. So there's a joy even within sadness. What is the joy within sadness? So I mentioned before the he who gets slapped. There you have a clown who's getting slapped, everybody's laughing, but there's deep sadness within. At his expense, everybody is getting a good laugh. But there's also the other way around, where there may be something that looks sad on the outside, but can be very joyful within. And that's appreciating the deeper meaning, the soul of these dire straits of these 3 weeks. So there's an interesting statement in the Medrash. It says, Tisha B'Av, as I said, is the saddest day of the year. Yet we say in the afternoon, Nachem, a prayer called consolation. The Arizal explains why. Because he says, on Tisha B'Av, afternoon, in the darkest moments, when the temple was literally burning to ashes, he says, Noilad Mashiach Shal Yisrael, the Medrash says, the Arizal quotes. The Redeemer of Israel was born, Mashiach was born. The birthday of Mashiach is in the darkest moment of the entire year. Strange concept. What is that? You'd think Yom Kippur is a good day for a birthday like that. Sukkot, Simchas Torah, Purim, Passover. It even says, "But Nisan Nigalu, Nisan Asidin Ligal." Nisan is a month of redemption, the month of the Egyptian Exodus. When we celebrate Passover, is a month of redemption. So, of all times that Mashiach is born, is the darkest moment. And in a long discussions, what the mystics explain is that even though darkness looks darkness to us, and we definitely have the right, and we demand that we want light and we want joy, but to suggest that darkness is absolute, airtight darkness is unacceptable. You know, they used to say about Ronald Reagan that he was this royal optimist. And the discussion used to use about these naive little country boys. Country boy comes to a barn, and he looks inside the barn, and he sees the barn is filled with manure from the floor to the ceiling. So you know what most people would say, which I will not say here at this occasion. So the optimistic, naive country boy says, there must be a pony in here somewhere. You know, he sees the cup that's half full. He sees that there must be something here that brought all this manure. So, in philosophy in general, you'll find different theories on evil, on the idea of evil in this universe. Of course, the big dilemma is, how could a good God allow for evil? So you have philosophical systems, schools of thought that say that evil is an illusion. That's true. A good God cannot allow evil. Evil is an illusion. There's no such thing as evil. I remember having a debate. Well, it wasn't a debate because I didn't debate, but the guy wanted a debate. In this class many years ago, you may remember. He was a very annoying guy. I'm not saying names, but he just did not stop all evening. He was trying to convince me that there's no such thing as evil. Everything that people do is always good in it. And not only was he trying to convince me of that, he was trying to convince me that I agree with him. That was what's annoying. I have no problem with someone being convinced of whatever theory, cockamamie theory they like. You know, when someone tells you, no, but what you're saying is exactly what I'm saying. You tell them, no, my friend, it's not what I'm saying. I'm telling you, I disagree absolutely with it. And they won't accept it. Like, to say to them, maybe what you're saying is what I'm saying, that's like beyond their scope, you know. It's just a very interesting, I guess, self-centeredness that you just cannot see any other, not just you cannot hear another opinion, every other opinion has to be like yours. That's somewhat radical, I would say. You know, you could have people who are just argumentative and they never agree with you. That's fine. Disagreeable people. But someone that, not only that, they can't accept even there's another opinion. And if you, as I said, if I said to him, no, you're agreeing with me, that was not possible. But I just remember, and then I realized the guy must be very, you know, from childhood must have some real boundary problems with good and evil. He was just too invested in this thing with no evil. So what are you telling me that if a murderer goes and rapes a young little girl and so on, he couldn't go there for some reason, whatever. I mean, I just used some horrendous example just to make the point. So there's one school of thought, there is no evil. It's an illusion and that's it. There's another school of thought that God removed himself from this universe. There are even some Jewish writers that have said that essentially God put the universe into motion and then removed himself, and it's human beings that can bring evil into the world. There's no contradiction because God's goodness is no longer here. What we do with it, that's what it's up to us. Harold Kushner somewhat makes this argument in his How Can Bad Things Happen to Good People? Maybe not as radical as that, but somewhat like that. And there are many other theories. So if I like this, okay. People may think that you're sending me notes that I said something wrong. No, he's saying, time for a joke. No, I'm just kidding. He's just telling me the timing here. So, without going through every possible theory, which can take all night, and as the old good masters, teachers would say, they wouldn't like to teach Mar Nevuchim. Mar Nevuchim is the God of the perplexed from the Rambam, Maimonides. Because they said that sometimes you get involved in the question, you fall asleep, and you only fall asleep with the question, and you forget to stay awake for the answer. So if I go through all the theories here, we're never going to get to the theory, the one I want to present, which is the Torah approach. So there are many theories on this evil thing. The Torah's approach, which is extremely profound, but in many ways quite, I don't like to use the word eloquent on evil, but it is eloquent. It goes back to what I mentioned before, the Tzimtzum, and it really explains the soul of the 3 weeks. And here's how it goes. It goes like this. Evil is the absence of good. Now what does that mean? To use an example, imagine a father or a parent conceals himself from his child, playing hide and go seek, in order for the child to go look for the parent, uses ingenuity to find his parent. The child begins to look, and then after a while he gives up, because he gives up, can't find his father. So up to that point it's fine. The whole thing was a concealment in order to test or to elicit the ingenuity and the wisdom of the child. But then if the child gives up, he starts going off doing other things, so the father remains crying in the corner, and that's where the problems begin. To use another example, this is an example from a chassid whose name was Hillel Paritcher. Paritch is the name of a city in Russia. So he gave this example about the 3 weeks actually. It says in Kabbalah that the 3 weeks is connected to the 3 Chabad, Chochmah Bina Das, the 3 intellectual faculties. The question is, those 3 intellectual faculties are considered to be a big great virtue. Why are they 3 negative weeks? And he gives the analogy of a teacher who's teaching wisdom, Chochmah Bina Das, wisdom, understanding and knowledge to a student. So a teacher conveys and transmits knowledge. Now at some moment the teacher has a very deep wish to convey a new revelation, an unprecedented new concept to his student, out of his deep love and commitment to his student. But in order to do so, he can't just continue speaking ideas that were till now. He has to stop, pause, collect his thoughts, dig deeper, and come out with this new revelation, a completely new approach. So there has to be a moment of silence, or maybe more than a moment. Regel kotten azavticha is the expression. For one moment, it seems like, to the student, it seems like the teacher has abandoned him, because the teacher stopped speaking. Till now you were teaching me, and now where'd you go? To the teacher, on the contrary, this silence, really the soul of it, the meaning of it, the deeper essence of it, is a much deeper connection and love of the student. Teacher's digging deeper into his own mind to come back with a greater revelation. The student, as I said, feels abandoned, and because he doesn't understand what the teacher is doing, may even leave and feel like the teacher has abandoned and forsaken him. So Hillel Paritch explains that the 3 weeks is a sense where the 2 temples were destroyed in order to build a 3rd temple that will never be destroyed. But in order to build it needs a lot of new energy. And for that there's a moment of silence, so it appears like darkness. And the key is not to be deceived by God's concealment, to see it as a deeper connection that just will take time for it to emerge. So what is evil? Evil is when we buy into the illusion that things are really concealed. And then we go off on our own, and that's when all the problems begin. I mentioned before, how is it possible for us to hurt each other? Because it's concealed, we don't see our connection. To the point we think this is reality. So evil is a product of our distorted view on divine concealment, if you could put it in a formula. Had we not been deceived by it, then we would understand it as just an opportunity to reveal. But since we are deceived, we begin going off on our own agenda, and then we can hurt each other. So how does a good God allow for evil in this world? Through concealment. God's presence is with us even while there's evil. But it's we that in a sense have pulled away, and therefore we think the concealment is more than concealment, as if God is not with us. Loneliness, existential loneliness, and the sadness that it brings, we all have a certain part of that. You know, when we leave this room tonight, even now you may be having it, there's a certain lonely part each of us carries, no matter where you are, no matter how many people love you. There's certain things that you carry that only you know, and you are very alone with. The deepest part of loneliness, of course, is when sad things happen. Interesting thing, Eicha, the book of Eicha, Lamentations, begins, Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, Hanavi, witnessed the destruction of Babylon, Babylon's destruction of the temple. And of all the things he describes, how he opens the book of Lamentations, and he describes horrendous scenes, terrible scenes. But how does he open all? Eicha Yashva Badad. Woe, or how sad. Eicha is like woe unto us. How sad. Yashva Badad, that she sits alone. Badad is alone, Yashva she. Who's the she? Jerusalem. Of all the things that Jeremiah was disturbed by most, and of course an opening of a book reflects the thing that shook him to the core, were not the deaths, were not the destruction of the Holy of Holies and the holiest place on earth, was not God's presence disappearing from this earth or concealed from this earth, was not the exile. Of all things, what disturbed them most was the loneliness of the city. Why? Because sadness is one thing, tragic events is one thing. What's much harder than tragic events is the loneliness that it creates. If we did not feel so lonely in our sadness, and we could reach to others, or we felt others are with us, or God is with you, you'd have the strength to see it through. The biggest problem of tragedy is that you're all alone in it. Because when it happens to you, God forbid, you know and you feel that no one else, it happened to no one else. Nobody can be here with me, because it didn't happen to them. In an interesting way, joy, on the other hand, one of the virtues of joy, as the Rambam says, why we have the mitzvah of inviting guests on Yom Tov, on a holiday, because joy, the nature of joy is not alone. You have a wedding of your child, you invite friends. Joy we can't celebrate with others, but sadness is not something that naturally we gravitate to others. We feel that we're separate. Because what sadness does, when tragedy strikes, the concealment is so profound, you don't feel, what's concealed from you is that others care. And what's concealed from you is that God may be with you. And what's most concealed from us is hope. So what happens is our myopic vision narrows to the point where we only see, in the narrowest way, only you and your pain. This is why Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, opens that the saddest thing of all was the loneliness. Because he said to himself, listen, with all the destruction, with all the killings, with all the expulsions and exile, if we at least knew we're not alone, we'd be able to at least have the strength, we'd strengthen each other. But once he saw that Jerusalem sits alone, he said, this is loneliness, this is existential loneliness, this already is almost unbearable, because you don't feel there's hope. It's like sitting in a dark room, and you have all your friends surrounding you, but you don't know they're there. Now, why God allows dark moments in life is a whole different discussion, which is not the theme for this evening, and it deserves its own discussion. I don't want to in any way suggest that it shouldn't be addressed. Maybe I'll address it next week more at length as we go through this period in time. But it is all part of, as I said, the grand plan, that in order for us to prove ourselves, the purpose of life can only be possible if there's concealment. Because if you're completely surrounded, as the Kabbalists would say, by the divine light, by Ein Ein Sof, the infinite divine light that surrounds all of existence, that fills all of existence, there'd be no room for independent individuals. So it's critical that we feel that we're independent of each other. But that where it goes over from concealment to actual destruction is when we misunderstand the concealment. When we misunderstand and think that the agnostic universe that God created is an end in itself. It's not an end in itself. The tzimtzum, the concealment, as with the teacher, is only a means It's a means for greater revelation. When you see a building being raised with a Z, R-A-Z-E-D, not it's being raised in order to be raised, R-A-I-S-E-D. I like that, Catherine, for a little poem. Which means you go and you see demolition of a building. So if you have a narrow view, you think, hey, what are they destroying buildings now? But then a few months later, you come, you see, wow, a much more beautiful building is built. You have to see it through. So Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were standing not far from the Temple Mount, as the Talmud says at the end of the tractate. And they're looking at the Temple Mount, and the other sages are crying. And Rabbi Akiva is laughing, smiling. And they ask him, why are you crying? Because they see the fulfillment of the tragic prophecy. Sho'olim helchim, they see foxes wandering in the Temple Mount, where once the holy high priest would go in the Holy of Holies on the holiest day of the year to commune with God. They're fox wandering about. And why are you laughing? They asked him. So he said, because he reads the end of the sentence, that once you'll see fox roaming, you know that the redemption is about to come next. The next step, the next verse will be fulfilled. So then they conclude, Akiva nechamtani, Akiva nechamtani. That Akiva, you have consoled us. Akiva, you've consoled us. Twice nachamu, like nachamu nachamu. So what did Rabbi Akiva see they didn't see? So Rabbi Akiva was, as some opinions hold, actually a convert. Some say he was a Ben Gerim, or a child of converts. Rabbi Akiva was a person till age 40, didn't know one word of Torah, and then became the greatest master of the entire Talmud. Kula aliba de Rabbi Akiva. Famous story, he met a woman, the daughter of Kal Shavua, and she convinced him that there's hope. Then he was walking in the woods, the Medrash says, and he saw a waterfall. He was pondering, what do you do, 40 years old, you're not a young man? I didn't mean that in any negative way to anybody in this room, if anybody has hit 40 yet here. But relatively to someone who hasn't studied, what's he going to do? So he saw a waterfall, and he saw water dropping. He saw a stone with a perfect hole drilled right through it. Perfect hole. And he's wondering, who made such a hole in a stone? And then he realized the drops of the waterfall were falling right into that hole. That over the years, drop after drop, those drops pierced the hole, a perfect hole through the stone. And he, of course, not being quite an intelligent person, understood and said to himself that if a mere stone can be pierced just with water, drop by drop, how much more so a human being, a soul. And that's what he did. He committed himself with the encouragement of his wife. As later he said that everything I have achieved and everything is all belongs to her, because it was all in her honor. Because she persuaded him and she inspired him. And a man at age 40, to begin a journey like that, it is old age in a sense. It's a complete new journey, spiritual journey. And becomes the greatest master of the entire Talmud. It's a Kula Aliba, they say the entire Talmud goes according to Rabbi Akiva. It's interesting story. And so Rabbi Akiva was a person who understood darkness. That's why he was able to see through what the other sages also knew the verse. What, they didn't know that there was a prophecy, just like they read the prophecy of doom, they saw there's a prophecy of redemption. They knew their Torah. So what, they needed Rabbi Akiva to tell them there's another verse? No, but they saw that verse, but they still cried because they saw destruction. He was actually able to laugh. This does not mean that Rabbi Akiva did not cry for the destruction, and Tisha B'Av came, no question that he too fasted and too mourned and grieved. It doesn't say anywhere that he did not. But he didn't see that as the entire picture. He saw the bigger picture. And when you see the bigger picture, it helps carry you through. So it's not some type of form of denial or escape. It's a bigger picture. You always wonder how the Jews, marching to their deaths literally, gas chambers, would say Shema Yisrael. And there's witnesses that heard them say it. And they would sing Ani Mamin, that I believe in complete faith that God will bring Mashiach, even though he may tarry, even though he was delayed. as the song goes, as the animamin goes. They're either completely insane. I mean, they're going to the death and they're singing, they're thanking God for what? This is the time you should be angry at God. So obviously, thank God, I was never there. I can't put myself in such shoes. And no one can judge anyone in that situation one way or another. These are sacred people, we call them Kadeshim. They have their own relationship with God, and they have their own chambers up in the heavens. But you think about it, and you think, the only thing I could really come up with, being a Jew myself, is that even though there wasn't conscious on their part, it was like, you can kill our bodies, and you can kill everything physical about us, but you cannot kill our hope. And if it's not us marching to Mashiach, it will be our children. And if it's not our children, it will be our grandchildren. And they live with that. That was what kept them alive, and that's why Jews are here today. Where does that come from? It comes from a profound faith that transcends pain. Does that mean we forget or we minimize the tragedy of the Holocaust? God forbid. Say Hashem yinkom damam, God should avenge their blood, and it was a tragedy of unprecedented, and we cry for it, but we don't allow ourselves to be destroyed by tears either. Hazerim bedima, we sow with tears, and we see the tears as raindrops that will one day give birth to berina yuktzera, to joy. There's a big picture. When Abraham was shown by God the vision that your children will be sent to a land that's not their own, exiled, and then said, and then they will leave with a great wealth. And when the Jews heard that, they said, we forgo the wealth, just let us out of here. But Abraham saw the vision, and he shared that vision with his children. And I have no doubt that lies embedded in the genes of the Jewish people. This is what carried them through every difficult moment. So it wasn't dismissing it, but there was a certain understanding there's a bigger picture. It's like that Rebbe that told the communist, when he pointed a gun to his head, and he said, Rabbi, in Russian he said to him, or Yiddish, this pistol here has made many people cooperate. And the Rebbe said to him calmly, this toy, is the word he used, this toy, can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. This was not like some cliche. He was at the threat of death. It was because he understood, not that he was embracing death. Jews never embrace death. But at Chai Bahem we say we live. But, frightening me, this is not my only reality. There's a bigger reality. So the fact of the matter is, it's about seeing a bigger picture. And that's why the Munkatcher is able to say, Mamayatin b'simcha, that even the sadness of the 3 weeks can also be, can also be diminished through simcha. Of course, it has to be with joy. That's according to halach, according to the way the Torah designates joy, through the study of Kudei Hashem Yisrael Mesamcha Lev, to the study of Torah. That's joy is through mitzvahs. It's not the joy of Purim, of other. There's different forms of joy. They tell the story. I don't know which Rebbe it was, that there was this fellow who was imprisoned in Eastern Europe. Of course, unfairly in those days. And his Rebbe came to see him, was allowed to give him permission to see him. He comes and sees his chassid sitting there, terrible sadness, depressed, crying. And the Rebbe says to him, didn't we teach you that you have to always serve God with joy? And you always have to find joy in your life. How are you sitting here so depressed? So he says, Rebbe, I'm not depressed about being in prison. I'm depressed that's already a few weeks since I'm here, that I'm not allowed to make a blessing on the food I eat. Why not? Because there's a pail in this room. He shows him there's a pail. The bathroom is in the same room, and according to Jewish law, you can't make a blessing in the bathroom. That's what he's crying. They can't make a blessing on the food. So his Rebbe says to him, but don't you know the same God that commanded you to make a blessing on food also commanded you not to make one when it's this type of dungeon. So that's also fulfilling God's will. So that should bring you joy. And he thought about it. He says, that's right. He's also performing a mitzvah. They're not making a blessing. Okay, his rabbi leaves him. His Rebbe leaves. And the Jewish chassid decides, time to celebrate. So he gets up and starts dancing. And of course, a prison is a weird place, so everyone else starts dancing too. Why not? Dancing. The whole cell is dancing. The whole floor is dancing. The Jews, non-Jews, everybody's dancing. The guards, of course, get furious. They come running. What is this dancing? So they all blame the Jew. The Jew is dancing. That's why we're dancing. And why is the Jew dancing? They say, we don't really know, but it's something to do with the pail in his room. So the guard says, we'll show that Jew. And he comes in, he takes the pail right out of it. That's the story they tell. They tell the story about the Kotzker Rebbe, who was once walking by the river, and he sees a person flailing arms in the water, drowning. And this man says, save me. And the Kotzker Rebbe says, I can't swim. I come in there, we'll both drown. But the guy is bobbing up and down, and he's desperate, and he keeps yelling as much as he was able to yell. And the Kotzker felt terrible, but what could he do? Finally, the last time he bobs up, and his head bobs up, the Kotzker says, but one thing I want to tell you, that when you go down below, do me a favor, send my best regards to the Leviosa. Send my best regards to the big fish that we're waiting for. When Mashiach comes, we'll have a big meal. So this Chassid started laughing so much from that joke that he got strength and was able to swim out of the water. That's what they tell the story. So laughter has its own ways. Now, again, you have to know when to laugh and when to cry. It's not that simple. It's all timing. Sometimes people do it at the wrong time. But the fact of the matter is that behind every sadness there is much to smile about. It's just being able to see the picture. This is not in any way, God forbid, being insensitive to the sadness or to sorrow. It's appreciating it. It's understanding it. It's letting it seep through you. But it's also knowing it's not the end of the story. It's not the end, period. It's not the end. Similar story, you hear that story also, a Holocaust person who was about to be killed by a Nazi. And the Nazi is about to shoot him, and the Jew is mumbling something. He's praying. So he says, what are you praying, you dirty Jew? He says, I'm thanking God. What are you thanking God for? I'm about to kill you. You're in a miserable situation. Look what your God did for you. So he says, I'm thanking God that He didn't create me like you. So is that humorous? It's not humorous, but it shows that there's a bigger picture. And it doesn't mean that we do not protest and are angry about the evil, but we also don't get consumed with it. There are people, when bad things happen, they get so consumed with it, they cannot see the bigger picture. So what do you do to see a bigger picture? Well, obviously you don't wait, God forbid, for the storm to strike or end up in the water, like with the Kotzker Rebbe. You start looking for a bigger picture before something strikes. You start building your so-called, they say in investments, you diversify. Like that Rebbe said, one God and many worlds. If you have one world and many gods, obviously that one world will be pulled away from you. You will feel it's the end. But when there are many worlds, and many worlds doesn't mean that we have to leave this world, many dimensions to life. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you think that you're going to worship youth and beautiful young looks, there's going to be a day when you're going to get a little older. And what are you going to do then? Does that mean that you can't find beauty? But if you worship one thing and that's the beginning and end of life, you have written your own script. If you worship money, if you worship power, anything that you worship that's temporary, by definition, anything that's temporary is transient. It means it changes. And you have basically subjected your life to the security in something that will have to change. So don't be surprised when things change, because it is going to change. The problem is when we're in the moment we get so consumed, so hypnotized, seduced by the things that we think are giving us happiness, that's hard to see the big picture. Sadly, it's sometimes sad events that wake us up. But the wisdom of a person is such that you don't have to wait for that. As I said, the whole universe is a state of concealment. You don't have to wait for the concealment to slap you in the face. It's a concealment even if it didn't happen to you yet. Let's put it that way. So when you see another person suffering, maybe that should be a wake-up call. You don't have to wait for it to happen to yourself. So the 3 weeks is a period in time where, on one hand, you can say, yes, it's a sad time, but it's also a very powerful time. It's a time to think about these things. Because as I said, life is inevitable. You will have your 3 weeks in this lifetime. You will have times where things will be destroyed. There's no way around that. The only thing around that is how you'll see it and how you'll look at it. Will there be a bigger picture? Will you be able to discover, unearth a deeper smile even in the deepest sadness, or not? There's some people that do in the happiest moments. They're always able to find something bad. I know some people like that. I try to avoid them. And if you look at your own Rolodex, you have to find friends that are ones that are going to help find beauty even when it doesn't seem so beautiful.
Why try to
Not the other ones. And I want to say, just as a concluding note, look, you don't have to avoid them if you don't want to. I'm just saying my position. We're all entitled to do what we want to do. Some people actually do gravitate to such people. It's like somewhat self-defeating prophecies. So I would say it's a good time, the 3 weeks, to do a cleanup. Not for chametz before Pesach. The cleanup now is to clean up your databases, your blackberries and blueberries and Rolodexes, and look at the people, what they do. How many people give you hope, even when things are not so, as they say, ay, so great. And how many people bring you down, even when things are looking very bright and beautiful. So so the 3 weeks is a deceptive time as well. It looks sometimes like sorrow, but it can be great joy if we see it through, if we understand its context. It's like riding through it and understanding it in the bigger picture. So we always conclude in a conversation like this, as the prophet says, Yehafchu yomim elu, that these days shall be transformed, the yom tevim moedim, and the yom tevim simcha, it should be transformed to days of joy and holidays. Maimonides quotes it in his book of law. Transformed means, the word transform means that not replaced, but actually transform means you take something and you transform it into something else. So sadness can be transformed to joy, and sorrow can be transformed to happiness. So God should bless everyone here to only have that happiness, and when those few dips come, to learn how to dance and gather strength from each other. And remember that we are not alone. It's not really loneliness. The loneliness is an illusion. We are really together, and the key is to find others that can help us feel that way. So, with that said, everyone should have a very happy week, and we shall continue next Wednesday. I want to say this class is dedicated by our good friend Mark Belinsky in honor of his birthday. So happy birthday, Mark! 21st of Tammuz, and your uncle's yahrzeit, Chaim Maran Ben Betzion. And happy birthday to our good friend Philip's wife, Nancy Temkin, as well. May you have very many good years together with your daughter, Lily. And everyone should only have joys and pleasant experiences. I do want to say that we continue the class here, but there are some changes coming that you'll be happy to hear about. We're going to be moving to a more permanent place, with a lot more programming and so on. If anyone would like to be part of that, to be helpful, especially right now we're in the stage of design and architecture a little and stuff like that. If anyone has any skills in that area or would like to be participating in something that I think can be quite revolutionary in New York, please see me or Velvel here. And with that said, we shall see each other next Wednesday night. Everyone have a very good night. Thank you so much.